I'm going to make a confession at the beginning of this episode. I don't really know how the sexual impulse works for women. I think I know. I've got a theory that I'm going to talk about in this episode, but I don't know if I know. This is how I've always understood the sexual impulse of men compared to women. If the strength of a woman's sexual urges were plotted on a graph over time, I imagine it would roughly look something like this. This is of course a neat simplification, but biologically it seems that a woman's sex drive is indelibly connected to her menstrual cycle. Each cycle lasts for 28 days, and as she gets closer to ovulation, she becomes more fertile. There's a 6-day period when she can become pregnant, and it's around this time of peak fertility that her sexual impulse will naturally go into overdrive. In fact, if you think of it as a literal engine, the woman's rev counter needle would start hitting the red zone during this time. She would be very easily aroused, she would crave sexual satisfaction, and she would far more easily be overwhelmed by her desires. So we'll call this section here the red zone. Now, after the ovulation is passed, however, it seems that a rev counter would naturally drop back out of the red zone. I'm led to believe that there's another surge back into the red zone prior to her period, possibly driven by hormones, but her period itself would then act as a reset on the whole cycle for another month. In the graph I've got it returning back to 0. That's probably not quite true, but all I'm trying to get at with this talk of graphs and rev counters is just that there would be natural peaks and troughs to the female sex drive throughout each month. Complete nonsense? Truth? Either way, let me move on to ground that I'm more sure of. The male sexual impulse would look something like this on a graph. A man's body is constantly producing semen. His testes are basically sperm factories. There's no off switch for them, they never take a day off. Therefore, semen is constantly building up inside of him. Now, there's a very simple equation here. The more semen a man has built up inside him, the stronger his need becomes for a release. He becomes more easily aroused, more easily overwhelmed, more desperate to find sexual fulfillment. He begins to hit that red zone. Now, unfortunately for the man, there's no natural release valve for the sexual pressure. There's no male version of a period that gives him a monthly reset. Once his testes are full, they stay full. Once his rev counter needle hits that red zone, it stays in the red zone. The excess semen starts to reabsorb back into his body, but since his testes are constantly producing more, they will never empty. Although he starts craving the relief of ejaculation, there's no routine event in life that will naturally provide it. I say nothing, but that's not strictly true. There is a caveat here. Sometimes men experience a kind of reset through nocturnal emissions, otherwise known as wet dreams. This is when he ejaculates in his sleep. Often it's down to being so pent up that he has sexualized dreams, maybe some friction from moving around in his sleep too. However, wet dreams become less common with time, and there's no guarantee that they will happen at all. They're certainly not regular. And if they don't occur, the man will simply continue walking around with his rev counter stuck in the red zone. The sexual impulse will remain at its strongest level, and there will be no relief. To be stuck in the red zone can be an incredibly distracting and frustrating experience, especially for younger men in their teens and 20s when the impulse is at its strongest. I don't think I'm overstating things to say that while his needle's stuck in the red zone, it becomes very difficult to function like a normal human being in polite society. Furthermore, if he lives in the West at least, he can expect no help from the world around him. In fact, quite the opposite. He's likely to find himself surrounded by things deliberately designed to excite his sexual impulse. Marketers long ago discovered that sex sells. If you want to shift units of something, tap into the universal power of the sexual impulse, and you probably will, because it has this unique capacity to override our rationale, our logic, to compel our actions, and to shape our behavior. Billboards are plastered with women in various stages of undress. TV shows and movies are filled with scenes of a sexual nature. Magazine racks have alluring covers. Women generally can be in the habit of wearing revealing clothes in their daily lives too. He simply won't be able to escape from the imagery, no matter where he looks. A man trying to keep himself chaste in the 21st century will often feel as though his own body and the world outside are colluding to conspire against him. Now, if I was wrong about the female sexual impulse and all that I've said about men also applies to women, then for the purposes of this series, it's actually going to make things a lot easier. If women also stay in the red zone until they find relief, and if their menstrual cycle doesn't affect that at all, then it means that I won't need to make such a distinction between the sexes moving forward. However, whether it's the same or not, I am sure that what I'm about to say next does apply equally to both the sexes. That when a person's sexual impulse hits the red zone like this, they are far more likely to make sexual mistakes. They're far more likely to succumb to the temptation of pornography in the red zone. They're far more likely to burn with lust and behave inappropriately in the red zone. They're far more likely to cross boundaries with their boyfriends or girlfriends and have sex outside of marriage in the red zone, or at least participate in activities that they're going to regret later. And of course, if they do make those mistakes, then they're far more likely to experience STIs, accidental pregnancies, abortions, all that kind of stuff. What I'm trying to say is, and in the next video, we're going to see how the Bible confirms this. The sexual impulse is so strong that it's dangerous to let it sit in the red zone like that. It is dangerous for someone to let it go unmet for too long. And what's more, its power grows through neglect. If you ignore it, it doesn't go away, it doesn't disappear. In fact, the opposite, it only gets stronger. It gets stronger and stronger until it hits that red zone, and then it just sits there. Indeed, the Bible suggests that even within marriages, if a husband or wife deprives their partner of sexual release for too long, the likelihood increases that Satan will be able to tempt and mistakes will be made. So there's a case here for saying that if ignoring it gives it strength, and if the red zone is dangerous, then it should be dampened somehow, it should be managed somehow. And that's where the case for concessionary masturbation really comes in.